All right, so looking at the last topic now, research methods in globalization. So we're going to look at two research methods in this, focusing mainly on correlational studies, and then the next lesson is a review. Okay, so right, so just a little bit of a review here. So these are some of the if they're saying what behavior does globalization affect. Happiness, we looked at that with the Japanese. Eating disorders in Fiji, and then mental health in general, and then religious extremism, perhaps even terrorism for the latest Lions Padilla study. This got me thinking, I wonder if there's any positive effects on globalization. Anyway, but we don't look at any. I never realized that until I made this unit. Okay, so now we're going to look at understanding the research methods used to understand the above effects. And what we're really going to focus on here is correlational studies, since two of the three, if not all three, you can argue that Becker et al. Was also correlational, but it's a more common one. Now, this is a 10-minute good TED talk from Sarah Lyons Padilla, so she explains her study. Now, I'd remind students this is followed by a quiz, so they need to pay careful attention. So this is in the workbooks. See how many of these things they can remember. Then this is a pretty interesting, if you've done my other units on quantitative research methods, we've looked at Tyler Vegan's pretty fascinating correlational studies. So this is a 4-minute summary of that, just to hook kids in and to remind them about the nature of correlational research. Now, get them to think, pair, share. These 3 studies we've looked at in this unit, and what do they think the research method used was. And then see if they can, in their workbooks, write the definitions of these 2 methods. And I would remind them to use pencil, and if they have no idea, leave it blank, because at the end of the day you want them to, or by the end of the lesson, you want them to have the correct definitions in here for their study. You can use these slides just to chalk and talk. Okay, correlational study measures the strength of a relationship between 2 covariables. They should not talk about IVs and DVs for correlational studies. And a natural experiment, an experiment with a naturally occurring independent variable. And remind them, these are HL students if they're doing globalization, and so they also have to remember 2 characteristics of these methods for paper 3. Okay, another think, pair, share. Can they think of examples of natural experiments and correlational studies from any of the course? And they should also, of course, put in here the studies from this unit, as well as any others. So how many of them can they think of? Now we get into an activity, singles to pairs to threes. So in the first task is individual. So they can choose by themselves, or you can assign them one of the 3 major studies from the unit. I would say for weaker students, you could use the Japanese. Actually, sorry, weaker students probably Becker et al.'s Fiji study, and for middle students the Japanese and happiness, and for your advanced students the Lions Padilla study, or they could just choose. You could leave it up to them. And so they write the study in their workbook, and they come up with decide what method it used, and then they try to think of a reason why they chose that particular method, and so give them 5 minutes just to work by themselves. After that, they find a partner who did a different study, and they partner up, and they share their answers and really try to encourage them to see if they could help improve their answers. And students are quite weak at giving feedback, so that's something they could work on here. And then we get into a group of 3, each hopefully with a different study, if that's possible. If it's not, just get them into a random group of 3, that's fine. And we're really focusing on correlational studies. So forget about the natural experiment for now, but we really want them to have to answer and work together to help to answer how and why correlational studies are used to study globalization and behavior. Since this was correlational, and you could argue that this was correlational in nature as well. And so they should discuss and then try to add answers to their workbook. Now this is followed by some chalk and talk slides if they need some help. The how is generally speaking covariables are measured using questionnaires. Now that could apply to any topic, but here hopefully they want to give them if they give specific examples, then that links it specifically to this topic. And typically one of the covariables is some sort of psychological outcome, for example subjective well-being. And then the other covariable, again we're trying to link it as much as we can to this specific topic, is some link with globalization. So if it's levels of individualism or an acculturation strategy by an immigrant. And then why a correlational study is used, and I would say because correlational studies are very helpful when we're studying difficult or impossible to measure variables. And how would we manipulate acculturation strategies in a lab? I mean, we can't do it. How would we manipulate levels of individualism in a lab? Like, we can't. And yeah, and so, and this another sort of general reason why correlational studies are useful is that they help us develop plausible hypotheses for future research, experimental research, if we can. And so we might look at natural experiments on this, or even more longitudinal studies that might help provide more causal explanations. Okay, And then so hopefully they can answer this question in their workbooks. And then that is us done. Now, one thing, because this is the end of most of the content of this unit, I would ask them, can they summarize in one sentence a big idea or a big lesson from this? Really get them to try thinking that conceptual framework. And then why do they think this is useful? And I don't want to lead them with this, so you just say, well, actually, is it? If they think that what they've learned here is just a waste of time and they're only going to use it for the exam, and after the exam they'll never use it again, that's fine, but get them to explain that maybe. Or this could be a homework reflection task. I don't like setting homework, or anyway, but it's okay. All right, so that's it. And in the next lesson, we're going to just do some review, and we're done.